How do you live your life to the full after leaving a high control religion like the Jehovah's Witnesses? That's what I'll be speaking about today on this week's episode of the Jexit podcast. Hello and welcome to the Jexit podcast. I'm your host, Riley, a former Jehovah's Witness who left the religion in 2019. Joining me today is Xavi Benjamin. Xavi is also a former Jehovah's Witness who left the religion round about the same time that I did. And we'll be speaking about living your best life after leaving the Jehovah's Witness religion. Hi Xavi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? It's such a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to have you with me. Thanks for joining. So, you're also an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Would you tell us a little bit about how you became a Jehovah's Witness and ultimately how you left?
Yeah, I was raised in this cult since I was a kid. Both of my parents were already Jehovah's Witnesses when I was born. On both sides of my family, it goes back a few generations. Both sets of my grandparents, for example, are also Jehovah's Witnesses. And then on one side, my great grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness. So it's like, it's highly entrenched, I would say, in my family. And so I think, my parents prided themselves on the fact that they would read Jehovah's Witness literature to me while I was in the womb, and they would say this kind of stuff to me when I was born. I don't know. I was in the theocratic ministry school at like 5 years old. I gave my first reading back when they used to have to do an introduction and an outro for the Bible reading. I was like 5 years old. I became a publisher at 8. I got baptized at 9. I think my family's goal was very much to push me in the direction of serving this organization. It was painted to me as serving God, and so that's what I thought it was. My parents would make a yearly trip to Brooklyn, New York, and they would take us, they would take me to Bethel, and, we'd make friends there and we'd have lunch there. And it was very clear that my parents wanted me to go to Bethel. My parents wanted me to have goals in the organization, to get titles, because that's what you do, right? When you're a Jehovah's Witness. But I think things didn't necessarily go to plan, because my parents were also had issues between themselves, had a lot of unresolved trauma from their childhoods that they hadn't processed, and ended up neglecting me a lot because they had worries about getting and providing, and so I ended up getting in trouble in the organization when I was a teenager. I started, I got privately reproved, then I got publicly reproved, then I got disfellowshipped. I've been disfellowshipped twice. I went back twice. Both times I was like fully POMI. And so, yeah, it has been quite the journey. Finally, what led to me wanting to leave was in 2018, I went through a really bad depressive episode where I felt like, if this is God's organization, why don't I feel loved here? That was the thought that came to my mind, and I couldn't escape that feeling. and that's kind of what started unraveling it for me. And that's when I stumbled across the XJW subreddit, and that unraveled everything for me.
Wow, that's quite a journey. Thanks for sharing such a personal experience with us. So, how did you initially come across the XJW subreddit? Did you like Google um, ex Jehovah's Witnesses, or did you like search for the kind of things that you were feeling to see if there was anyone else in your position with similar feelings? How did you get there?
This is an interesting thing, because I don't remember exactly how I got onto the XJW subreddit. I know, I've been an avid Reddit user for a long time, so I don't know if it was like suggested to me, or if like I went and looked for something, specific. Um, but what I do know is, as soon as I got into the JW subreddit, the things that I found were Crisis of Conscience, that book, and at the time, I also found Lloyd Evans videos. And so I started like doing a lot of reading into that book, and then watching some of those videos as well. I, well, I don't want to get into the controversy about Lloyd, but I'll just say, like some of his content was very, very helpful to me. And and then Crisis of Conscience was also very eye-opening to me, in seeing how the organization had backtracked on things, and essentially punished people for a certain thing, and then suddenly just not, and especially as someone who had been disfellowshipped, twice. I've been in like 4 judicial committees. Like, I feel like that angered me. It angered me to realize that these were just like man-made issues and man created problems. And so that's yeah. I went down the rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, I think we all go through that rabbit hole stage. I know I certainly did. The first time I started questioning the organization and dared to Google Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think I came across the XJW subreddit almost immediately, and it just blew my mind. It blew my mind. I think I'd already been watching XJW videos on YouTube for about a week, maybe, or maybe a few days, even less than a week. But the videos I was watching on YouTube were more about debunking the doctrine. But then the XJW subreddit were people's personal experiences, and a lot of the history of the organization that I had no idea of, and it really blew my mind, and I was so glad that I did it. It was very, very scary. It was extremely scary, but I'm really glad that I did. So if we could just circle back to your childhood as a JW, what was the hardest thing for you growing up as a Jehovah's Witness?
I think I think it's several things. As a kid, I was always drawn to performance. I was always drawn to art in some kind of way. I think from very little, I wanted to be a singer or some kind of artist in that way, or an actor. And that was one of those dreams that was kind of completely snuffed out. I had other aspirations of like just being in sports at school, and that not being allowed. So I loved basketball. I got into the NBA when I was like maybe I want to say like 13 or 14. And around that time, like, I really got into basketball and I loved it. And I would play at lunch, and, it was like constant. Right. And I wanted to be on the team so badly. And, my parents wouldn't let me, because they were like, these kids are going to corrupt you or whatever, you know? And I think the other thing has been my sexuality, because I think even before I understood that I was bisexual, uh, I felt like my curiosity towards sex was always this horrible thing. And it was this thing that, like, for many years I felt so much shame about, and I hated myself for it. Um, and so I feel like, I don't know. I mean, there are so many different things to choose, I think, of having a Jehovah's Witness childhood. I mean, and that's without to even mention the fact that you are completely excluded from social things, right? Outside of the community. I was basically never invited to birthdays, or the times that I was invited, of course I wasn't allowed to go. Any sleepovers or things like that kids had at school, I wasn't allowed to do that. There's so many other things that I think now that I'm older, I realize, wow, I missed out on a lot of different experiences because of this religion, ultimately. But it is what it is.
That's really interesting, because I have not quite a similar experience, but when I first started researching the organization and reading about people's experiences on the XJW subreddit and some YouTube videos as well, I started to notice that there were common themes, there were common topics that kept on recurring over and over and over and over again. And one of those was sexual repression. And that's something that immediately struck a chord with me, because although I'm straight, as a young person growing up in the religion, my curiosity about sex and sexual things is something that I felt like an immense amount of shame and guilt over. And then seeing that I wasn't the only one who went through that was so validating, but it also solidified in my mind that the way we grew up wasn't normal. It wasn't normal, and it wasn't healthy. And repressing a child's natural curiosity about sexual things only serves to harm them later on in life. And it certainly did with me. And realizing that I wasn't the only one in that, it just helps me to understand that, wow, we really, really went through a lot. And these are things that I'm only now in my mid-40s I'm starting to unpack and trying to heal from. How do you feel about that negative aspect of being raised as a Jehovah's Witness?
I mean, I think it's I think, like I said earlier, and I kind of said it in jest, but it is what it is, which is comforting, I think, to a certain extent, and allows me to also move forward, because I think one of the things that therapy has helped me with the most, coming out of this cult, has been the idea of accepting what is, rather than always hoping or wishing for something else. Like, you can make positive changes toward your outcomes in the future, I believe, right? But I think that's where I kind of stand on it. I feel like it happened, and I think acknowledging it helps me move on and try to move forward now, because I feel like what I have done now is try to make those changes so that I can, I don't know, in my way, regain what I feel like I lost, if that makes any sense, because I think a common feeling that a lot of XJWs feel when they leave is that feeling of like, wow, I was robbed. Like there's time here that was stolen from me. It feels like, right? Because you didn't get to make these choices for yourself. And I think that is what is so liberating for me now, is that I get to look at my past and then make different decisions now, and explore the things that I want to explore, not feel shame for the things that I'm interested in or curious about. Not experiencing guilt for being a horny bitch. Like I'm pretty public about that, and like that feels good to me, and I think it heals those parts of me that were so repressed and that did face all of that trauma earlier in life.
That is a great attitude to have. And I agree with you 100% about accepting that it is what it is. And I mean, I've gone through therapy. I'm going through therapy at the moment, actually. And something that has really, really helped me is self-acceptance. Accepting that there is nothing wrong with you as a person. And that is such a stark contrast from what it's like as a Jehovah's Witness, because there is always something more. You're never good enough. There was always something more that you could be doing, or something better that you could be. So you're never, ever satisfied with yourself. And that can lead to never, ever liking yourself. And that's something that I really, really struggled with. And I know I'm not alone in that, from the people that I've spoken to and the experiences that I've read. And, also from you sharing your experience, it's obvious that you've had similar feelings too.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you're saying. Because yes, I mean, I was just about to ask you, like, do you like, I feel constantly like this organization put this feeling of like, I'm not lovable there. I totally put the blame of that on this religion, because I feel like that's what that is, that feeling of you're never enough. And I think I felt that a lot while I was a Jehovah's Witness, of constantly trying and thinking in my mind, I want to serve God. I want to do what's right. And yet it always feeling like that is not enough. You're always missing or deficient, right, in some way. And I think that comes from that like original sin kind of belief, in my opinion, of this thing that you are fundamentally a sinner. You are fundamentally a bad person. That is what that thought is. You're fundamentally a bad person, and the only reason why you do good things is because you have God, right? And I think changing that mentality is so freeing. I actually posted a video about this recently, because I had this thought while I was on a walk, that even when there's something about yourself that you're maybe not happy with and you want to change, that cannot start from a place of hatred. That cannot start from a place of criticism. And I think that's what, again, I learned from this religion, where in reality, real change starts with love. How does this change that I want to implement in my life show me love? And I think that's been such a huge mindset change for me. And again, one of the many benefits of leaving this religion.
Oh my goodness, I could go on that subject for days without interruption. Absolutely. I mean, something that I've recently learned in therapy as well is being charitable and kind to myself, both my present self and my past self. You know, we all have that inner critic, that voice in our head that condemns us. I mean, and I'm sure that voice is much harsher for people who grew up in a, fundamentalist religious environment as we did. My inner critic's favorite scripture was miserable man that I am. That was my inner critic's favorite scripture. And that's something that would replay over and over and over again in my head whenever I felt bad about something. And there's nothing wrong with noticing your mistakes and wanting to do better, but that shouldn't come from a place of self-condemnation. As you said, that should come from a place of love and, kindness to yourself. I mean, the thought of being kind to yourself, that entire concept was just foreign to me up until relatively recently, but any positive, and not just positive, any healthy change has to start from there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like you tell your listeners, right, that we mute each other while you're talking because I just want the people to know I was reacting to, to everything you were saying. But yeah, I think that's so true. I think that's so true. And I wanted to I don't know if this is a tangent of where our conversation is, but I kind of wanted to go back to something that we were talking about earlier about the XJW subreddit and how that also changed how I viewed apostates and how I viewed myself becoming an apostate too, because I think that again, the cult teaches this very black and white thinking, right? You're either with us or you're against us. And so I thought, and I kind of ate up the propaganda that these apostates were liars, they're people that want to stray you from the faith or whatever. But then you get out and, like you said, you go and you read in the XJW subreddit, especially. I think also XJW Facebook groups are a great way to just get an insight into this. And you see people who actually are suffering from religious abuse, are actually suffering from spiritual abuse, right? Are actually being sexually repressed, are actually being abused by an organization that pretends to speak for God, but that doesn't. And I think that changed my whole outlook on it as well, because it just made me realize that humans are complex creatures, and it's important to hear the individual stories, right? Because again, if you just read what this organization says about all of us XJWs, I mean, you would think that we're all just crazy nuts and mentally diseased, as they say. But the reality is we're a ton of people who have been through a very traumatic experience, and yet somehow have come through the other side. And I think that's admirable. Not something to look down on at all.
You're absolutely right. And what you said really resonated with me when you were talking about how you viewed yourself becoming a quote unquote apostate. And I had such a strong reaction to that because when I started researching the organization for the first time, when I sat down at my computer and I decided that I was going to give myself permission to research the organization, it felt to me like I was becoming a Sith Lord from Star Wars. Like, so I'm a huge nerd and I love anything sci-fi. But that whole journey that Anakin Skywalker had when he was wrestling with himself as to, whether he was going to follow his emotional impulses or he was going to follow the advice that he was being given from the people around him. And you could see that he was going through that battle. That's exactly what it was like for me. And I felt like, okay, I've been out of the organization for almost a year and a half. I've celebrated birthdays. I've celebrated Christmas. I've had sex. this is like the final frontier. This is like crossing the Rubicon. The point of no return. If I do this now, I am an apostate. And apostates were monsters. They were evil, wicked, and it felt like I was voluntarily becoming all of those things. So it was like, up until this point, I haven't done anything that Jehovah can't forgive me for eventually. But if I do this, that is it. And it was such a turning point. It was extremely difficult. I actually had a panic attack at that moment, you know, but I pushed through it, and here I am now 5 years later, you know. But it is such a difficult thing to do. And I don't think anyone who haven't gone through an experience of leaving a high control religion could ever get it. I've heard people say, well, if you don't like your religion, just stop going. It's not as easy as that. It's not like just this changing which church you decide to go to. It's got to do with your whole identity, your whole self-perception. It's so difficult.
I mean, I think again, it's such a difficult experience. It's like the Matrix. I think it's like the Matrix. It's very much like that, where your whole construction of reality is dismantled because your beliefs are no longer true. And that's a very hard experience. And I think that that's the other thing too, that I always felt like my family and the people that kind of ended up stopping talking to me, they didn't understand that, like, I didn't choose this. I think a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that are still in, they think that people choose to leave this organization like this, but it doesn't quite happen like that. People are like, oh, you just left because you want to sin, or because you're selfish or whatever. But it's like, no, when you realize that these beliefs do not have evidence to support them, again, that you didn't choose that. It just means that that's what the evidence supports. I don't know, but again, I think that what's frustrating, and I again, I wonder if this is going to take us on a tangent as well. But I think what's frustrating and what's interesting about the world is you realize that this cult is just a microcosm of what our broader world is like, in the sense that we are constantly being propagandized, if not by religion, by something else, and that realization of, oh my gosh, I've been lied to about something that I thought for sure was real, is a very scary feeling. And realizing that may apply to other things within your life is incredibly scary. Incredibly scary.
It's absolutely terrifying. And I'm not sure if you faded or if you were disfellowshipped, but I left because I was disfellowshipped, so I didn't leave voluntarily, so to speak. I was kicked out. But that was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. And I've described it many times before as being like an astronaut on a spacewalk, and then you become untethered from the space shuttle or from the space station, and you're just adrift. You're just adrift. And because of the vast emptiness of space, there's no way for you to orient yourself. There's no up, there's no down, there's no left, there's no right, there's no depth perception. You're just adrift and in a sea of nothing. And there's nothing to grab onto for any kind of security. and it's so terrifying. That's what it was like for me. Was it like that for you too?
The short answer is yes. I think when you start questioning this religion, it becomes a rabbit hole of questions, right? Because once one question can't be answered, then there are other questions that also can't be answered, right? Again, I feel like I experienced this also with my just belief in God, because I think there are some people who leave this religion and still believe in God, and that's totally fine. I was one of those people that I feel like I lost both of those things. I lost this religion, my belief in this religion, and I lost my belief in a God. Because again, I think you have to be able to prove things, especially when it comes to things that you are talking about having universal meaning and having, life and death consequences. Those things have to make sense. They have to make sense. They have to be able to be scrutinized and stand the test of that scrutiny. And I don't know. I feel like, again, I point to a broader problem in our society that we have about that. That, like, you cannot just make claims about something and claim that it's real. There has to be valid and evidence to prove that. And that's the thing. I think that it's easy to get away with a lot of logical fallacies with God because people don't stop to think, wait a second, let's set aside the God part. Do I believe this? Does this make sense to me? Does it make sense for God to kill David's firstborn, for example, for having an affair with someone? Does that make sense to me as a rational person? Does it make sense for a loving God to kill an innocent child? No, right? So it once you start asking those questions, it's just it's one thing leads to another, and I think it just unravels.
It certainly unraveled for me. So I mean, I went through a period of time where I described myself as being spiritual but not religious. I know now that could be categorized as deism, believing in a creator, but not necessarily believing that creator is an all-powerful, almighty God, or rendering worship to that creator. I was for a while in that mindset, but then I realized that everything up until that point that I had considered to be proof or evidence of God's existence was a combination of wishful thinking and confirmation bias. And really, when I was in that phase, it was because I felt like I was letting go of a piece of myself to not believe in God at all. And that was uncomfortable and scary. And, it didn't feel right. But then I thought to myself, wait a second, just because it doesn't feel right doesn't mean that it's real, doesn't mean that it's true. Do I want to be the kind of person who prefers a comforting falsehood to, a harsh reality? And I decided that I wanted to be the kind of person that preferred a harsh reality. And I mean, not to say that having some kind of faith doesn't have its merits. It does. And I guess it comes down to what's most important to you when it comes to your worldview. For me, it's truth and facts and reality and everything involved in it. For some people, it's things like hope and optimism. So truth and facts aren't necessarily so important to them. So, I mean, that's just my assessment of it from an outsider point of view. Somebody who feels that way might explain it differently.
It's yeah. I mean, I feel like you're making some great points here, because I think that I feel like I try to live my life in that place between hope and optimism, but also truth. It has to be. I feel like it has to be based in truth, or at least I don't know. And again, I think that's how I've always been. And so I think I don't know. For me, it's interesting because now I feel like, oh, it makes so much sense that I would end up leaving this organization and that I would become an apostate just based on my personality. Like, I feel like, oh, it makes so much sense because I am a person that does seek out truth, but I'm also a hopeful and optimistic person. And yeah, I thought I felt like if again, this religion is supposed to be representing the almighty one true God, then that has to stand up to scrutiny. And I think it was as I started to make this transition that I felt more, I don't know. My relationship with God has been interesting because I feel like for most of my life, my relationship with God was one of a lot of guilt. You know, I whenever I would pray, I felt like I was such a bad person throughout most of my life. And then at one point, and and I think it's, you know, obviously because of all of this, it changed to no, if you are out there, you are going to respond to me then. Like, I feel like if you are truly an almighty, all powerful God, then you will be held accountable by us then. I think that is only fair, you know, because you cannot tell me that you're all loving and all powerful and then again allow so much death, disease, all these things that we consider to be bad, let's say, about our human existence, and still claim to be all loving and all powerful, you know. And so that's I think that is also a reason why atheism has appealed to me more and more. Not necessarily because, and I think where I've landed is somewhere on agnostic atheism, because obviously, again, I cannot prove to you that there is no God. But what I will say is that if there is a God, you know, it's not the one that I've been told about. It's not the one that is in the Bible. It's not the one that Jehovah's Witnesses teach about. It's not that thing. But yeah, I don't know what it is.
Honestly, so much of what you said resonates with me, especially when it comes to holding God accountable, you know. And this is like a fundamental mind shift that I went through as well, is that authority figures and people in positions of power, they are more accountable to us than people on our own level. They really are. And when you think of what it's like as a Jehovah's Witness, we gave Jehovah so much slack. We cut him so much slack simply because he's Jehovah and he can't be questioned. But I completely think the opposite now. I think the more powerful someone is and the more authority they have, the more right you have to question them, you know. And after I left the religion, I went through a period of time where I was so angry. I was so angry with Jehovah. I was so angry with the elders over things that just did not make sense to me. And I kept on replaying it over and over and over in my head. Why is it that when things go wrong, when things are bad in the world, they say, oh, well, because the world is a reflection of its leader. The world is bad because its leader, Satan, is bad. But then when things go wrong in the organization, why is that? Why is Jehovah or Jesus not held accountable for that? Why is that the people? And I was like, it can't work both ways. That doesn't make any sense. You know, why are the world's problems blamed on Satan, but then the organization's problems are blamed on the people in the organization rather than the leadership, who they say is ultimately, Jesus and Jehovah. Why one rule for the world and one rule for the organization? And that didn't make sense to me, and I wrestled with that for such a long time. And it really, really did make me angry.
I agree with you so much on what you said, especially, man, that sentence of the more powerful someone is, the more accountable they should be. And I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I always had a lot of trouble with the illustration that I think it was the Bible Teach book would use. It was of, this kid that stood in front of the class and wanted to teach the class. And so the teacher allows it. Right. And I always had trouble with that analogy because it felt like it didn't properly represent the stakes according to even Jehovah's Witness standards. If we were to accept Jehovah's Witness, the Jehovah's Witness premise, it would be more along the lines of like a bus driver allowing a student to to drive the bus, like you're allowing someone who you say isn't qualified to do this, to drive the bus into a lake, into, into whatever, into a wall. I mean, that's ridiculous. How can God not be held accountable for everything that has happened, even if Satan is the one that has perpetrated some of it? Like, it's just ridiculous. It is ridiculous that the all-powerful being is not at the end of the day accountable for that kind of stuff.
Totally. And that the analogy you presented is so much more appropriate than that one about the kid teaching the class. Also, while that kid is driving the bus, with the permission of the driver, the kids on the bus are all killing each other. And committing unspeakable acts of harm. The analogy just doesn't work. The one they present, it just doesn't work at all. What would you say was your biggest challenge being someone newly out of high control religion, being thrust into the real world, having your entire worldview completely shattered by finding out the truth about the truth? What was the biggest challenge in that situation for you?
I mean, I feel like this is, and it continues to be, a challenge. And I feel like it's loneliness. It's what I told you before. I have this ingrained feeling in me that I continue to try to work on. That is that I'm not lovable. And it's because that's what happens to you when your whole family doesn't talk to you. That's what happens to you when all of your friends and your community abandons you. And so I still feel that. And I think I still struggle with that, is that feeling of loneliness, because I think it is, as much as, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't build chosen family, that you shouldn't, get out there and try to make new friends. I mean, that's what I have tried to do. Right. But I don't want to make the mistake that Jehovah's Witnesses seem to make, which is that they think that like some other Jehovah's Witness can replace their family member when their family member has left the organization. No, like my chosen family is great and I love them, but that doesn't replace the fact that, most of my family doesn't talk to me. And that doesn't replace the fact that, so many people of my community that have known me my whole life want nothing to do with me. That is incredibly hard. I think especially because, I back in 2019, I decided to move back to San Diego, California. And this is where I grew up most of my life. And so I feel like I know so many fucking people around here, and none of them talk to me. And so I feel like if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, or if, I ended up in the hospital, you know, the number of people that I can actually reach out to and communicate that to, or have as an emergency contact, is very limited, And like, that's the thing that just will never not be hard. That the most people have their family as a foundation, at least have, some family that they can rely on or something. But a lot of XJWs do not have it. And that is really, really hard. And it continues to be hard for me.
It's heart-wrenching. It's absolutely heart-wrenching, and it's like you're grieving people who are still alive, not because they're dead, but because they've chosen to view you as being dead. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal and inhumane. I think that's probably the best word that I can use to describe it. Is inhumane.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I guess I really wanted to be honest about this, because I feel like I don't want to sugarcoat this for anybody. Like, I don't, and I don't think not that anybody does, but it's the losing of your family and community is so difficult. And again, I go back to that thing of, like, a lot of XJWs think that people choose this. No, nobody chooses wanting to be estranged from their family and their loved ones. No one chooses that. No one wants that. So you gotta look at the circumstances around it. And I think that, this sucks. It sucks. Like I said, I have family that lives literally around the corner from me that I haven't spoken to them in 4 years at least, so that's tough, that's tough. And so I think, I will say, on the positive side, that I think this is why it's also so key to develop community with XJWs as well, because you find other people that have been through similar experiences, and again, that doesn't mean that all XJWs are automatically good people. I mean, like, we gotta, you still have to do your same process of vetting with everybody that you encounter. But I feel like it's important to find community with XJWs, because, again, it reminds you that you are not alone. And I think, like I said, I think my circle is quite small, but the circle of people that I do have are amazing, and I love them very much, and I appreciate them a ton, and some of those friends I've found on XJW Facebook groups, and we've become really, really great friends, and again, I don't mean to minimize those relationships. Those relationships are valued and are very important to me. But again, it's just tough. Because no one can replace your family, that no one can replace your family ultimately. And that it is what it is in regards to that, but it doesn't make it any less tough, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It is so difficult. I completely agree with you about, having a community of XJW friends. That shared experience makes up for so much. It really, really does. And also, when it comes to making new friends, I found that doing that as an XJW is so difficult. I mean, it's difficult making friends as an adult anyway, but I think that being an XJW adds another layer of complexity to that, because we didn't really have to make friends as Jehovah's Witnesses. We had a ready-made bunch of friends. You know, you were encouraged or told outright that you had to be friends with people in the congregation, no matter what. You just had to be friends with them. You know, so you didn't really have to do any work or put in any effort. They were just there. You were friends by proximity, you know. So I think, especially if you're born into the religion, you missed out on being able to develop the skills that are necessary to make, you know, relationships from scratch. Yeah. Have you found that in your experience?
Yeah, big time. I mean, I relate to that so much because I feel socially inept. I feel socially inept a lot of times. Like I don't know how to interact with like people, you know? And I notice I notice people who were not raised in a high control religion, they go to restaurants and just casually meet people out and about in life, just by saying hello or by being friendly. And those are all skills that I feel like I do not have because I was told to shut all of these people out, right? All the time. And so, yeah, I totally feel that. I think also you're totally right in terms of finding friends as an adult. Again, capitalism has us in this hamster wheel of being at work, right, all the time, and so we're constantly working, and I think that what that does is it has come in between our ability to make friends. I mean, especially right now, especially here in the United States, people have multiple jobs. They have their regular job, then they have a side hustle. I mean, I have like 3 jobs right now. It's like it's nuts, I feel like it that makes it really hard to make friends and have time to socialize and things like that. So that also makes for lonely experiences at times. And so it's important, I think, to be cognizant of that and understand that so that you can try to like disrupt that cycle every once in a while and realize that you got to get out. You got to get out to events. You got to, go out and see things and do things that you enjoy because there are going to be people there that you might like and that might like you. So you never know.
That is so true. My wife and I, we had that experience recently. We went to a local pub. It's like a community pub, and they held a class there teaching people about gin, this local brand of gin. So the guy who founded the company that makes this gin, he came in and he told us about the history of his company and how he started making gin during the first lockdown at the start of the pandemic. And yeah, we were on this event with a great bunch of people, and we got on really well with them. And we know that they frequently go to this pub. The next time we go, we'll probably see them there, and we'll just start chatting. And that natural, organic way of starting and building up friendships, we just didn't have. And it's something that's totally new to me, but it's like really, really normal for everybody else. But it's exciting. It really, really is exciting. So that's something that I would try to impress upon anyone who's newly left the organization is, do things, try to make friends. That might sound like a bit of rubbish advice to go and make friends, but go and do, like you said, go and do things that you enjoy. There'll be people there. You never know what could happen, because loneliness is such a big thing in the XJW community. There are so many reasons why a lot of XJWs end up taking their own lives, and I would be so bold as to say that loneliness is probably the number one reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to sugarcoat this as well. I've definitely had suicidal thoughts throughout this experience, and I definitely don't judge anybody who has felt this way, because again, what we're talking about is extremely hard. Yeah, I think sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it's hard for me to comprehend um, the abnormality, I guess, of this experience because I'm going through it, right? But like, again, when I try to look at it a little bit from a bird's eye perspective, um, being ostracized by your loved ones and your community is a very, very difficult thing to go through. And I think, especially when uh, so many of us end up realizing that we did nothing wrong, you know, um, because that's the thing. I mean, I guess you getting punished, let's say, for something that you did is one thing, I guess, you being sent to prison for murder, let's say, is a different thing than you being, again, ostracized by everyone because you no longer believe the same thing that they believe. That's I mean, that's insane, and I don't, I think it's sometimes, um, again, like I said, it's hard to comprehend the abnormality of that experience sometimes when you're living it. And so I, I don't know, I send loving, vibes and hugs to every person out there, or any person out there who has had these feelings before or has thought about suicide before, because it's again, this is a very, very difficult experience. But I think where I have also landed on it, is that while it is a difficult experience, it does not prevent me from moving on. It does not prevent me from moving forward. It does not prevent me from still having a good life that I enjoy and that I love. Um, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard at times. It doesn't mean that I am not going to feel dissatisfied with my life at times, or dissatisfied with the circumstances of my life at times, because of things, again, that were completely outside of my control in regards to this religion. But at the end of the day, I just feel like, I know there are good things. I know there are good things ahead. There are always good things ahead, and I think for me, there's still a lot of like life to live. There's still a lot of experiences to have, and where I've come down on it is just, yeah, I don't want to let any of these things to prevent me from doing those things that I want to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. Personally, I feel so much freer now to be my authentic self and to experience everything that life has to offer, guilt free as well. And not just guilt free, but as a Jehovah's Witness, you've got a really strange set of priorities, and you always are at the bottom. You're always supposed to be doing something to serve some greater, grander purpose. And you as a person usually have very little to do with it, you know. But now you realize that this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is life. This life that we have is the only one that we have, you know, and having this strategy of deferring the best things in life for something later is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. You're missing what's right in front of you. And what's right in front of you is the only thing that you definitely know you've got.
I agree with that so much, because again, I think that came from that belief, right? That we were temporary residents, and so you're kind of always in this mentality that you live in a hotel, that your bags are kind of semi-packed, that you don't really get comfortable. And I think you're so right. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is life. I truly feel that if there's anything that I definitely want to be grateful about myself, is that for some reason, there's always optimism at the end for me. I don't know why. I don't know how I have gotten that. I don't know what that is inside of me. Even in my darkest times, and the times where, like I've said, I have felt like, man, all this fucking shit is pointless. Even in those times, I feel like there's always still that glimmer of hope and optimism. And I think that what you're saying is the thing that gives me optimism, is the thing that says, no, this is my life. I now have control of it. Um I now have the ability to make decisions for myself. And what am I going to do with that opportunity, with the opportunity to make decisions for my life? And I think at first it's scary. I think it's scary to realize that you have more of the reins than maybe you thought. But I think, at least for me, I think it's also been very exciting, because there have been so many things that I wanted to do. Before when I was in this cult, that now I have gotten to do. I mean, let me just list a few of them for you. Like, for example, I always wanted to be an artist. I released my first EP last year. Let's see. I always wanted to be a hoe, to be honest with you. I and now I get to do that. I get to be a hoe every day. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes in theory more than in practice, but still, and so I feel like those are the things that make me happy, that I realize that, wow, I get to truly live the life that I want to live. And that is exciting. That is exciting, because yes, I still think, am I, is it still important for me to do positive things for my community and around, in my surroundings? It is. It's just not defined as it was before.
You know what? When you were talking about being a hoe, I was in stitches. Isn't it great when you realize that things you thought were bad are completely benign, and they're not bad at all? It's like, during the first lockdown back in early 2020, Marsha, we were dating at the time, and she was over here in the UK, and she was stranded because of the lockdown and all the airports were closed and everything. I gotta say, it was the best time of my life. Being locked in a room 24/7 with your best friend, someone whose company you really enjoy. We had a blast. We had an absolute blast. And I learned that I really love getting drunk. And we would intentionally get drunk. And it was so much fun. It wasn't the disgraceful thing that the Bible makes it out to be. As long as you're in a safe environment and you don't hurt anyone, it can become completely fine. Completely fine. It's like, all this time, all this time I was thinking that it was such a bad thing, but it's not really at all. It's just fun. I mean, you pay for it the next day if you feel sick, but that's on you. It doesn't affect anybody else.
Yeah. That is very, very true. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So many things that are just so completely innocent. I mean, again, like I told you, I was in 4 judicial committees. And all of the things that I got in this trouble for were so innocent. They were so innocent. I mean, I never ever, it's so funny to me, because I just never thought about it that way. I never thought about it that way while I was going through it, obviously. But then, later you realize, man, this is so ridiculous. And now I think I enjoy a lot of that too, because I think, like you were saying, that experience of getting drunk kind of taught you like, oh, this is not bad. And I feel like I've had that with a lot of things. I've had that with I tried mushrooms. I've tried I am a regular weed smoker. I've tried a lot of spicy things, shall we say? But every time I do it, I'm like, wow, it wasn't as bad as they told me it was going to be, And I don't know. I think again, that's one of those very freeing experiences about this whole thing, right? It's getting, I think that's very healing, right? Having those experiences that are in direct contrast to what you were told and what that neural pathway, shall we say, that was already created. I think that's so helpful and healing to realize, oh yeah, they're wrong, they were full of shit the whole time.
Absolutely. I mean, one huge lesson that I learned on my, was it third birthday or fourth birthday? I think I'm up to I think this birthday will be my fifth. So it was my third birthday. Marsha and I were in Paris. And a huge lesson that I learned was that life is for living. Life is for living. That's what life is about. Life isn't about servitude. It's not about servitude. I mean, it's good to do nice things for others. That can give you a great sense of fulfillment and it contributes positively to the world. But that's very, very different from being a slave, from being an unpaid employee of a publishing company. Life is for living and for experiencing. And I think these cultic groups, they hijack your life by trying to control your ability to experience life at a fundamental level, and that's what was done to us. It's sad, but now that we know that, we can use our lives for what it's supposed to be for. We can, determine our own purpose, and we can just experience the good things that life has to offer. And that's a gift. It's a huge gift because there are 8 million people who haven't realized that yet.
Well, and I love what you said, that life is not about being an a non-paid employee for a publishing company, and I would add media and real estate company. When you really look at it that way, it's not about the fact that like you should leave, Jehovah's Witnesses and then be a selfish asshole the rest of your life. You know what I mean? Like I think that's like the way that kind of narrative gets perverted. But ultimately, it's about deciding, no, this is a corporation. This is a publishing, real estate, and media corporation that doesn't give a shit about me. And yes, on top of everything, does not pay me for my time that I spend here. And on top of everything, also traumatizes me and represses me and all this other stuff, right? And realizing that no, you can live your life to choose what you want to do. And that can take many shapes and forms. That can be, being of service to other people through, through other means, and volunteering in your community. And, I mean, there's so many different opportunities to help other people, right? But I think it's so helpful to view it exactly like that. Like, do I want to be an unpaid employee for a publishing company? No. But that then gives me the freedom to choose what it is that I want to do with my life, and what positive impacts I do want to have in life on others.
I could not agree more. 100%. Xavi, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun. Thank you so much for this great conversation.
One last question. What advice would you give to somebody who is only just waking up to the truth about the truth? What would you tell them?
I think I would say seek out community. Like, seek out community because I think that is going to be the biggest help in all the things that are going to come along this journey. I think it's when you start to realize that this is not true, like we were speaking earlier, that can be a very disorienting experience. And so I think community can really help ground you. Because also there are resources already that exist within the XJW community that help people understand more about the situation that they're going through. So yeah, that's what I would say. Seek out community via Facebook, via like subreddit. Find these things so that you don't have to go through the experience alone.
Thank you. That's great advice. So, how can my listeners get in touch with you or find out about you? Do you have a podcast or a website or anything that you'd like to tell them about?
Yeah. You can find me on XaviBenjamin.com. That has links to all of my different things that I do. I'm an artist, and I also have a podcast called Glamorous and Polyamorous, where we talk about exploring polyamory and non-monogamy after leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. So yeah, that's where people can find me.
Excellent. I'll be sure to include those links in the show notes as well. Thank you. And that is it for this week's episode of the Jexit podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, comment, and also subscribe so that you're alerted each time a new episode is posted. Thanks again for tuning in and have a great week.